It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We've been discussing America and Israel's war in Iran and how it's affecting different aspects of our economy. And now we turn to cars. Automakers and auto suppliers are a huge part of Metro Detroit's economy, and they'll likely have to change as the war unfolds. As America's strikes against Iran continue and the Strait of Hormuz remains in question, gas prices are rising. And more people are thinking about purchasing an electric vehicle. But despite interest, how much will EV sales actually increase for companies like Ford, GM, and Stellantis, especially as car sales in general have plummeted over the past few decades? To discuss, we have John McElroy with us. He's an automotive analyst with AutoLine. John, welcome back.
Thanks so much, Robin. Good to be here.
So it's no secret. Gas prices are going up. Fuel costs are too. So first, I'm wondering, how are GM, Ford, and Stellantis reacting to the war in Iran? How does it change their business?
You know, you don't see it overtly, but behind the scenes, they're scrambling to watch their supply chains because, you know, we know that the price of oil is going up and oil's not getting through. Well, guess what? Plastics are all made from oil feedstocks. There's a lot of plastics that goes into cars. It also turns out that a lot of aluminum comes out of the Middle East through the Straits of Hormuz. Aluminum is very energy intensive to manufacture. The Middle East makes a lot of that. It also manufactures a lot of helium, which is needed to make computer chips. And so we're seeing supply chains absolutely get disrupted. We're a little bit protected here in the United States, but in other parts of the industry around the world, they're starting to feel this impact right now. And guess what? It's only going to get worse. Even if everything is declared, over and done with today and the straits open up, they've used up all the reserves of all these things that I just mentioned. And so it's going to get worse for some months to come. And that's just assuming all the hostilities would end today.
So you're saying, John, that behind closed doors, leaders of the big three right now are biting their nails. They are wringing their hands a little bit. They're quite concerned because there are so many cascading effects right now of these rising oil costs.
Yeah, and the industry can't seem to get a break. I mean, you had COVID, then you had a chip shortage. You had a big ship get stuck in the Suez Canal that slowed things down. Ford had a big fire at its aluminum supplier plant. There was a strike, a couple of years ago. And so then here comes Trump's tariffs, which just last year cost the industry in North America $35 billion. Probably going to be the same impact now. The Trump administration ripped the rug out from under them when it comes to EVs. And now we've got this war going on in Iran. And like I said, for the auto industry, it's just one crisis after another.
I want to stay on the topic of EVs because when you talk about the automakers not able to get a break, I'm thinking about the fact that there was a federal deal that folks could get to make EVs much cheaper, and that ended under the Trump administration. And now, the irony is that the energy spike is a reminder to potential buyers that EVs are really attractive. Tesla sold more cars in the first few months of this year than it did during the year prior. Are more people purchasing EVs from Ford, GM, and Stellantis right now, despite that federal tax credit being gone?
No, they're not. I mean, EV sales in the United States have come down dramatically. There's some areas that look better than others. You mentioned Tesla. It's seen an increase in sales. Cadillac is another one that is doing a pretty good job of selling EVs. In the first quarter, their sales were up over 18% in an overall market that was down and an EV segment that was really down. So about 1 out of 3 Cadillacs being sold right now is an EV. So they've cracked the code. But if you look elsewhere within General Motors, Chevrolet, for example, EV sales really came down in the first quarter. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but overall, there's no question the EV segment is down.
Do you think the war in Iran, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, do you think that this is going to cause some sort of reckoning with the big three automakers when it comes to EVs and the need to figure out how to bolster this industry with the absence of federal tax credits?
Well, look, to bring out a new car today is at least a 3-year effort, minimum, and several $1 billion of investment to have that happen. So it's not like the big three are looking at pump prices and going, oh my gosh, we got to figure out this EV thing. They've been working at it for years. There's some really interesting things that are coming. So Ford, for example, has got a radically different approach to how you design, engineer, and manufacture vehicles overall, but EVs specifically. They've been pretty open about it, so we know some more of those details than we do at others. I'm told General Motors is also taking an approach to significantly reduce the cost of EVs. But we're still a couple of years away before those vehicles hit the market. But having said that, you have to take a very different approach than the industry has historically tried to develop new cars. And, everybody knows that Henry Ford was the first to use the moving assembly line for automotive assembly starting in 1913. This new Ford EV platform that's coming out will actually get rid of the moving assembly line as we know it. And it's going to require many hundreds of fewer workers in the plant to be able to build this vehicle. And that's how you take cost out. You don't try to cheapen a car or beat up your suppliers for lower prices. You have to design cost out. And that's what the industry is working on now.
Hundreds fewer workers working on cars. I'm wondering if the UAW is already pushing back against these plans.
No, obviously the UAW already agreed to do this. And I think it's the recognition that if you do not allow an automaker like Ford or potentially GM or Stellantis to come up with new ways, and I mean radically different ways of taking the cost out of car, there may not be a GM, Ford, or Stellantis 10 years hence. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. This industry is at, I'm not going to say a breaking point, but it's at a tipping point. And, affordability is one of the biggest issues facing the industry right now. Many people cannot afford to buy a new car. In fact, based on my calculations, the industry has priced 5 million households out of the new car market because they just can't afford to buy these things.
I mean, and would you say that number is growing and perhaps likely even higher as the days go by, given the affordability crisis that we find ourselves in right now?
Look, we're in what I call peak auto. Auto sales in the United States are lower today than they were 25 years ago.
Wow.
In that same time frame, the U.S. population has grown by 60 million people. 60 million more people in the country, car sales lower than they were 25 years ago. So this is why I say it's peak auto. And unless the industry figures out a way to make cars much more affordable than they are right now, its future is one of no growth whatsoever, and really on an inflation-adjusted basis, no increase in sales.
I want to go back to the word that you've used a few times now, and that is radical, to describe how automakers have to change their approach. And it has me wondering about the division when it comes to who's interested in EVs. And I'm talking about from a political perspective, because it's more young people and more Democrats in particular who are interested in buying an electric vehicle. And I know that they're pivoting away from EVs, but electric vehicles are still likely the future of the market. I mean, we live in a polarized political environment. And when I say they're pivoting, I'm talking about the big three, which you've given us examples of how they're not pivoting. But more broadly speaking, we could say that there's been some pivots. At any rate, do Ford, GM, and Stellantis need to be making EVs more attractive to Republicans? Because, John, I have to tell you, I was at this electrification expo in Chicago, and I'm talking to this man who owns a Ford EV, the Ford Lightning, which has now stopped production, right? That is Ford's EV truck.
Yeah, that's right.
He said, you know what the problem is? And again, this is a Republican. He said, Republicans see EVs the way Democrats see guns. He said, we got to change that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
How
So here's how you change it, or one of the ways that you change it. And let me preface that by saying, I know plenty of conservatives who are interested in EVs. But overall, you're absolutely right. It's unfortunate that an automotive technology has become politicized.
Yes.
That sort of blows my mind, that technology can be politicized. But irrespective of that, look, there's a lot of people interested in EVs right now across the political spectrum. But as you say, heretofore, the industry has tried to sell EVs from an environmental standpoint. You know, save the planet, fight global warming, save the polar bears. Well, guess what? Less than 10% of the car buying public uses that as a motivation to buy a new car. Having said that, there's probably, and this is based on some pretty good market research, not that I've done, but that others have done, that there's several million people out there right now that are seriously considering an EV. But maybe the car company that they're fond of does not have a model that meets their needs. Definitely the prices of new EVs are too high. They're very worried about public charging stations and whether there's going to be enough of them. They want to see more EVs on the road so that they have that sort of comfort feeling that it's out there. We're getting there. I think we will see EV sales start to recover in about 2 years' time. By 2030, I think they're going to be going strong. And once all those things that I just mentioned have been addressed, you're going to see several million people come in annually to buy an electric vehicle.
So you're saying, John, we're about to see a much different marketing campaign when it comes to EVs, maybe one that's focused on affordability and convenience and much less so focused on saving the polar bears.
Yeah. Like I said, selling it as an environmental benefit is not what motivates people to buy cars. And coming back to the issue that you raised before, how do you get conservatives interested in it? It's like, look, EVs don't use oil. It makes the U.S. stronger from a geopolitical standpoint. If you're driving a car that can be charged with electricity, and guess what? Any number of fuels can be used for that, whether it's natural gas or solar or wind or even nuclear and, God forbid, coal. But we have a wide array of different fuel sources to be able to generate electricity. Also, the batteries that go into them are using the same technology that's needed by the U.S. military. Here's a fact that I love to quote. When our military drops our war fighters into a combat zone, each and every one of our war fighters has 18 pounds of batteries as part of their kit. It's for night vision systems. It's for communication and other things. Where do you think most of those batteries come from? They either come from China or Asia. And if they don't come from China directly, they use materials that were processed in China. So I would argue to conservatives, look, we need to be able to make those batteries in the U.S. with our own materials or those from our allies. And we need the volume that the auto industry brings to make this affordable for our own military. That's how I sell EVs to conservatives who say, why should we even have these things?
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is automotive analyst with AutoLine, John McElroy. We're discussing how Ford, GM, and Stellantis have been impacted by America and Israel's war in Iran. I want to discuss another automaker, if we could, for a moment, and that is Toyota, because this is a very interesting story. They've succeeded over a long period of time for many reasons, but one of them, experts say, is because the company prioritizes long-term stability over short-term stock market wins. And so this has me wondering, John, should we allow our car companies and maybe other public companies in America to not remain so beholden to shareholders? And in that way, they could actually operate for long-term gains instead of needing to continue to make a ton of money in the short term.
Well, that's a great question, Robin. And I don't know is that I've got a great answer for it. But I would say this, look, the American system is what it is, and we have the most dynamic economy in the world by far. Japan has been languishing literally since 1990, unable to grow its economy, certainly not even close to what the U.S. economy is on a par with. But Toyota does have very good long-term ways of approaching things. In fact, this is really more of an Asian approach. I would say the Hyundai Group is very much in the same vein. But I think there are tax policies that could be enacted in the U.S. that would reward companies for long-term strategic planning and investment. But let's take the EV investment as an example. The Biden administration came in, lavished the industry with multiple billions, tens of billions of money just flowing. I would argue that it also put unrealistic expectations of how EV sales would go. And so the industry invested extremely heavily into all this because there was a mandate, and not a direct mandate for EVs, but you could not meet emission or fuel economy standards without having a bunch of EVs in your fleet. Then comes the Trump administration, rips the rug out from under everybody. It has cost the industry many tens of billions. I would say easily just for in North America alone, the domestic automakers and their suppliers, at least $50 billion was wiped out. So when you say, how do you get these companies to focus on the long term? It starts with government policy that is steady, predictable, ongoing, and allows them to earn at least a reasonable kind of return. So it really starts with policy, government policy, tax policy, to change the focus of the C-suite at these automakers to not just try to figure out how to make the stock pop by the end of the year. Because for investors, that's long term, right? The end of the year is long term. We need to start thinking in much longer terms than that.
Steady, predictable governing is not what we're seeing right now, John. And that includes the war in Iran and its impacts. And so I want to end on this. If America remains at war, how will Ford, GM, and Stellantis and companies that are supported by the big three here in Michigan be affected if this keeps going?
It's going to drive up their costs. Unquestionably already doing so. It's going to make consumers pull back and not buy as many vehicles, which is going to lead to layoffs in the industry. It's just going to be not good for the industry. And it's, as you mentioned at the top of this segment, this region, Southeast Michigan, depends so heavily on the automotive industry. It is our economic growth engine. And it's the biggest employer that we have, too. So all this matters to us. Whether we're interested in cars or not, this war in Iran is definitely going to have an impact on the automotive industry and Southeast Michigan economy along with it.
I mean, and that's, of course, the bigger theme of this conversation is when the big three are hurting, Southeast Michigan's economy is hurting, no?
Absolutely. You can see it just in, for example, the profit-sharing checks that the UAW workers earn. When they get those checks, business booms in Southeast Michigan. A lot of them invest it, but a lot of them go out and spend. And so, for example, Stellantis, which is going through horrific problems right now, their workers got zero profit sharing this year because there were no profits to share. And that's going to impact not just them, but all the different businesses around this area that would have been beneficiaries of the kind of spending that kind of profit sharing generates.
All right, one final thing. I promise this is the last one. What are you looking most closely at right now as an analyst who studies the auto industry? What is the thing? What is going to be the indicator to you that things are perhaps moving in a slightly positive direction?
Well, like I said, I don't think we're going to see anything positive this year at all. My focus right now is on some of the things we touched on earlier. This new universal electric vehicle platform that Ford's coming out. I mean, it's mind-blowing. I'm absolutely excited about it because it's revolutionary. And Ford's the first one to do this. And, just as in 1913 when Henry Ford went to the moving assembly line, every car company in the world had to copy him. They didn't have a choice. I believe the same thing is going to happen with this new EV platform. I know GM's got some things up its sleeve. It's not been very open about what's coming, but those are the things that I'm really focused on. How do you design cost out? Not of just cars, but of the process as well. And if they can pull this off, it's going to be exciting and it's going to be good for this area.
John McElroy is an automotive analyst with AutoLine. John, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Robin. It's been a pleasure.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Coming up, people are not feeling confident about our economy. We've been talking about that all hour, but folks are still spending. So what's going on with that? We'll look into that more next on the Metro. Stay with us.